Hi, welcome to Pay It Forward, a brand new pattern for you today, and I'm a little late today, my apologies. My little Disney, my new puppy, is keeping me very busy, so lots of distractions, but we're here now. Now, I have for so long been promising you a little panda bear, and this is a pattern that is very, very sweet, very rounded, so it's a different shape. For all of you who love the bear making, this brings me back to basics, and every now and then I just love to do that. For me, there's nothing like creating a beautiful little bear with lovely rounded shapes, very simple in design. So nothing really expensive here, made up completely in felt. And of course it's a panda bear, but you could make it up in any versions, any bi-coloured combinations you like. So you can just imagine them made up in beautiful ice cream candy colours. Just a gorgeous little shape. So you'll just need your free pattern. I've got that all ready for you. Now you need to find that pattern link. It's in the description box below. You'll be able to print out those pattern templates on your own home printer. Make sure to set your printer to be printing at actual size, or perhaps A4 or even letter. But do use the measuring bar that's on your pattern templates so that you get your pattern pieces absolutely correct. I do include all seam allowances in my patterns, so you don't have to do any extra work. Just cut out right on that line. So let's get busy making a beautiful little panda. Now let's get started with our beautiful little panda bear by having a look at our materials and requirements. Now I do make this one up in felt, and felt comes in so many different colours. Remember that your panda can just be a two-toned bear of any colour combination at all. I'm going to make it up in the classic cream and black, just so you can really get that look of that effect. But two-toned bears are really gorgeous little bears, and it's a way of adding a whole lot of character to your bear without a whole lot of work. So I have my interfaced felt. Now I always use my fusible woven cotton interfacing on the back of my felt, and you do need to use felt for this project because of the way that we close our openings. We need a non-fray finish. So I've got my two back pieces there. I have my front body piece. This is for the body. Make sure that you transfer all of your markings on the back as well. There's my body front, and these are my two side body pieces. So it's put together a little differently, this one, and everything is interfaced. So next we have our arm and leg pieces. Now I already have a little leg and arm put together, and you can see just how sweet the style is. Just such a baby little style, very short little limbs, little feet. I'm using grey for the paw pads, just to bring in that colour. I've actually got a beautiful little hand knitted cardigan for mine at the end, and I must say these little bears in felt wear knitted garments very, very well. There's nothing I like better than a beautifully made plain little bear in a little hand knitted jumper or cardi. So just a personal love of mine. So I've got mine already. So that's the little legs and arms made up, and of course we've got the other two that I will show you. So we've just got our inner arm, which has your joint spot on it, and your outer arm, and the same for the legs as well. And they are cut in the black fabric. So I make the body completely in the cream, and the legs and arms and the ears in the black. So we can pop those aside. So for the head, we've got our two side head pieces, and we've also got our centre gusset there. We'll be adding some little eye patches on that bear head once it's put together. And we're going to be doing some very simple flat felting. So you'll need your felting needle. A fine one is really good. So probably anything about a 39 to a 40 is really good for felting these little spots in place. I'll give you a couple of alternatives. If you don't want to be doing that sort of work, you can always use your alcohol markers, or actually airbrush. My masterclass people, you could airbrush those little spots into place under the eyes. So we've also got a little piece, I've got a piece of leather here, cut template, ready to add the nose. I'm going to be stitching a nose. Again, my masterclass people, if you want to sculpt a nose, go right ahead and do that. This little bear looks beautiful with a sweet little sculpted nose. We are going to need 2 little ear pieces. I've got one already stitched up. It's quite a long, short ear, and we really curl these ears this time. Gives it a lovely panda effect. And that is, again, it's just your felt with your interfacing applied, and we'll be sewing that one up as well. We need our joints. So we have our neck joint, which is 30 millimeters. All your details are in your materials and requirements. And we also have the arm and leg joints. They are all 25 millimeters. You'll need some eyes for this one. The size of the eye is really up to you. I'm going for about an 8 millimeter. This one actually looks better with a smaller eye. Now, the other thing I'm going to be doing, because I'm adding a black eye onto a black eye patch, I've got a piece of white felt ready because I'm going to be cutting just a little circle out to sit behind the eye so that it shows up on that black, which is very important. You might be using other colours where your black eye is going to show up just fine on your colour, and you won't need to do that. So we're going to need a little bit of clear craft glue. We are going to need our extra strong threads throughout, and also some Perle Thread if you're going to be stitching that nose, and also that's how we do our closing. Much easier than doing a ladder stitch closing. We'll only have one on the back to do. So of course your wool felting needle, we're going to be filling with polyester filling. We don't need any weight in this one. It's a very, very simple little bear to make, and very, very striking in all sorts of colours. So let's get started on our arms and leg pieces. So we'll move everything else out the way. So our first step is going to be to make those up. We're going to put that little foot pad out the way. We don't need that for the moment. So the arm and leg pieces are just so simple. I've kept it without a paw pad on the arm. So very, very easy to make up. So you're going to put your right sides together, and you've got marks on your pattern pieces that show you where to start and finish your sewing. Always work on the outer arm. This is the inner arm with the joint spot there. Working on the outer arm with your sewing, your pinning, and your actual sewing the seam, it just helps that little arm curve inwards a little. It'll follow the natural curve of your hand and your work. So, and make sure that you do that on the opposite arm as well, and you'll get 2 lovely little curved in arms. So the stitching on this one is, it is a 4 millimeter seam allowance throughout, and I do overcast all of my seams first with just a little overcasting stitch. Some people call it a whip stitch. And I will sew my seam at 4 millimeters once I've done that. Starting here at this mark, I'll sew back and forth, go all the way around and back and forth here. And I sew straight over the top of that 2 times, just so that that seam's really strong. I've got a jeans needle in my machine. I always sew with a jeans needle, and I have my stitch length set to number 2. Just with the polyester thread, an all-purpose polyester thread, which is strongest. So you need to do that with both of the arms, and the legs are exactly the same. Right sides together. Again, we're working on the outer leg for the same reason, so those legs tuck in nicely. Line everything up. Here's your starting points again. The difference this time is we're only going to sew to the back of the heel. So that one 2 times, and also right down to the front of the toe, because of course we need to add the foot pad in here. So I'm going to get those pieces all overcast and stitched up, and we will come back and turn them through. So that has my stitching done. Now with the arm, you can go ahead and turn that one through, and do make sure you get in there and push out all of those curves with a knitting needle or something similar. Then you want to roll those seams out, so you get lovely rounded curves there. We're just going to set that little arm aside there, because before we can turn the leg through, of course, we've got to add that foot pad. First thing I've done is I have removed some of my tacking, see there my tacking stitch? I've removed some of those tacking stitches on the toe and the back of the heel there. I do that so that I can open that seam nice and flat on both sides. So now we're going to take our foot pad, and the larger end is the toe. We've got a mark there on our pattern piece there on our paw pad, and we want to take our pin through right at that seam allowance, right on that point. And then we're going to take our pin and put it straight through that seam. Make sure it's perfectly lined up and you're taking it through at the seam allowance also. You want to make sure it's right through the center there. Push that pin head all the way down. Then we're going to repeat the same thing at the back with the heel. Pin through that mark and then straight through that seam, just 4 millimeters in. Take that right through the center and also push that pin head all the way down. So now we're going to pin in the rest of the foot pad. Make sure this really is anchored in. Tricky way to pin is to take your pin through both of those layers, flip it over and just take up a little bit of the fabric from the other side. Push your pin head all the way down. This is pinning in 3D and it makes all the difference to being able to sew those foot pads in easily. If you pin in the regular way, it's just nearly impossible. So your pin goes through both layers, flip it over, take a little bit up on the other side and pin head all the way down. And you can continue on till you've got that one pinned in right the way. Do make sure that each of your toe and heels are anchored into place. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to overcast with that tacking stitch that foot pad into place. Then we'll come back and I'll show you how to sew the seam. So there we go, that has that foot pad overcast in place. That means that we can remove our pins much easier to sew that seam without all those pins in the way. So now I've got a single strand of my extra strong thread in my black and I've got a knot in the end. We're going to start, I always start to sew mine in. Well, we can't sew these in on the machine because they're just too small. You won't get it nice and even. Very important with foot pads. It's one of the most visible things on your bear. It's very important that they're beautifully rounded. So we're going to start in at our seam allowance. I'm coming from the underneath. And first of all, I'm just going to sew 2 stitches right on top of the other at that seam allowance. And this is called a stab back stitch. I'll put the link at the top there for you to check out my video that shows you how to sew this one. It's quite clear here because of the black stitching on the white. So you can see that first 2 stitches there. Then we just travel along from the underneath and we come up the length of the stitch. You do need to keep them quite small, just as you would a machine stitch. And we've gone back into that last exit hole. So we're coming up, traveling along a little, we're going back into that last exit hole. We do that every time so that this stitch is linked back and front and it's very, very strong. Because we're sewing it this way with extra strong thread, we only need to sew this once. When we sew on the machine our seams, we're using polyester thread, a normal thread, so we sew them twice. Of course, it is important to sew those seams twice because we're adding filling to these things. It's not like just making a dress. So you can see I'm just traveling along. I'm keeping my stitches nice and even, and you should be able to get a seam that is just as straight and even as if you were sewing it on the machine. So I'm just going to continue on right the way around to get that foot pad in, and do make sure on your toe and heel that you do a couple of stitches either side so that toe is really reinforced, and same with the heel. So you can see there that I've turned that one through and I've gone ahead and I've stuffed the foot and the ankle there before I put the joint in. It's just easier to get in there and do that. You can also see just how firm I've stuffed that, and it's really brought out that shape. And also when you're filling a leg or an arm, you need to be mindful again of the joint side and this side. And as you're filling that arm, you need to be thinking about the shape that you're wanting to make. So you're not just filling a hole, you're creating a shape as you fill. So with that done, we're now going to add the joint, and it's the same on the arms as on the legs. I've increased the size of that joint hole there. I've got my joint ready to go in, and because I'm using my nut and bolt system, which I will also put a video link at the top there for you. Shows you how to make your own joints just like this. They're very simple. We're just going to glue that joint in. It stops it from spinning when we do it up on the other side when we're putting it on the body. So just pop that one through. Make sure that the fabric is pushed all the way down around the base of that bolt. And I find it's a good idea just to pop on temporarily the rest of your joint on the other side. It just allows you to wind that down and clamp those two discs together while that glue is drying. It also means that you can continue on stuffing, filling and closing that limb while that glue is drying. So now I'm going to keep going, adding my stuffing right up until the top. Now here's where you get up to the top. We're going to be closing the opening with a blanket stitch here. So we need to create a nice rounded sort of a top. So this is where your wool felting needle will come in handy. As you get closer to the top with your filling, you can actually pack that into that nice shape. I'm going to get that done and show you how it should look. So there you can see that it's a nice rounded finish I've given up. I've gone in there with my felting needle and I've just tucked everything in nicely following that curve, but enough room to close that opening. So now I'm going to take I'm using 8-ply Perle thread. It's a single strand with a knot in the end. You can use 5-ply, totally up to you. I'm going to go in and come out right in the middle of the seam, right where that starts to open up. Pull that one through and it's going to hold with that knot. And my first stitch is going to go straight in through that seam allowance. So it's a blanket stitch. So we're taking that needle through all of the layers and bringing the needle out through the loop. Again, if you haven't sewn a blanket stitch, I'll put the link at the top there for you to have a look at, one of my videos. Again, going in at that 4mm seam allowance and bringing that needle out through the loop. So that's going to bring those edges together. Now, because we've interfaced our felt, we've got that white core that does show just a little on your finished seam. The beauty of making these parts of the bear black means that when we're done, we can actually go over that seam with a black fabric marker and we can get rid of any of those white core pieces that are showing. Alternatively, you could use a black fusible woven interfacing, which I've definitely done before, but I'm not very good at seeing black. So I still like to interface it in white, and I find that once I've used my laundry marker on that seam, you can see it's absolutely flawless. Of course, if you're using another colour, my best tip for getting great coverage on this seam and covering up that white core would be to use a 5-ply Perle thread, because it's just that little bit thicker and it will cover and bind that edge a little better. I just prefer working with 8-ply Perle thread. It's my favourite quality. So you can see I'm just, as I'm going around, keeping those edges nicely lined up, keeping my stitches nice and even, we're going to be able to close that opening completely. So you can see what I mean about that little bit of that white core showing there. So simple as getting our pen and we can just touch that up, just to give you that perfect finish. As I said, obviously you can see if you use a heavier weight thread like the 5-ply Perle, you will definitely get more coverage. But because I'm using black, I get to use the thread I like. Make sure you go ahead too and pull out all of those little fibres of your stuffing. Give it a trim if you need to. And that has our arms and legs complete and ready to go. So before we go on to our body, let's put the ears together, because it's good to have those ready to pin into place while we're making our head, getting all our facial features right. So that's my one completed ear. So again, it's quite simple. It's just putting those right sides together, lining up those marks. This mark at the top is just to help you line up that top. And we're just going to overcast. We're going to leave this section open for turning. We're going to overcast from here all the way around to the other side. And that is just a nice small 4mm seam allowance. Don't go larger than that because it's quite small to turn through. And I only sew this one time, but I do reinforce back and forth on that start and finish. So I've gone ahead and turned that ear through, pushed out all those seams, particularly into those corners. Then I've just tucked that opening, those edges under and just slip stitched that close. So we've got our ears done, all of our arms and legs ready. We can put them all aside. Let's get started on the body, which of course I'm making in cream. And the first thing that I do is you've got your back, this is your centre back seam here, your centre back opening. You've got marks on your pattern pieces that show you where that opening is. And I first of all sew a very close zigzag in between those two marks where that opening will be. That's to stay stitched that edge so it doesn't stretch and it doesn't fray. Definitely need to do that. Makes it easier when we come to close that opening in the end. So then we're just going to put our right sides together and we're going to sew that centre back seam with our 4mm seam allowance, but we're leaving that section open. So you want to make sure you back and forth at your start and finish at the top, and also particularly here on that opening, because as we're filling, there's going to be some pressure put on there. So again, back and forth and down to the base here. So that has my centre back seam stitched and I've left that opening there. Now I have opened up some of that tacking stitch you can see there at the top and the bottom so I can flatten those seams. Now we're going to take our body front and we're going to put right sides together and line those up. And I'm just going to put a clip in there. I'm going to do the same at the base. You've got a centre mark on each of those that you can line up with that centre seam. And we're simply going to stitch on the bottom one. We're going to stitch straight across 2 times with our 4mm seam allowance. With the top one, we're going to stitch straight across, but we're just going to leave a space just wide enough for your bolt to pass through. And do make sure you back and forth on the start and finish of each side so that that little hole that you leave stays nice and firm. So I'm going to get both of those stitched into place. Okay, so once you've got the top and the bottom stitched, I've done the same thing again and opened up that overcasting stitching on the edges to flatten those seams. Now we're going to take one of our side pieces, a little peanut shaped pieces, then more narrow part goes at the top, and we have our centre marks again, which we can put our pin through. It's just like pinning in a foot pad. And then we're going to go straight through that seam at the top there. Make sure you're going right through the centre at your seam allowance. Then we're going to do the same at the base. Pin straight through and then through the seam at the base. And then we can just start fitting that around. Now we're going to pin it in exactly the same way as we did with the foot pad, where we're going through both, flipping it over and taking up some on the other side. And I like to go from side to side. You find if you've kept to your seam allowances, this piece is going to fit in really well. Just a matter of lining it up all the way around. On each side, you'll find that's going to fit in beautifully. You can see that already. I'm going to get that all pinned in and then I'm going to overcast and remove my pins. So now I have that one overcast in place, all of my pins are removed, and just as we did with the foot pad, I'm going to sew with that stab back stitch just the top curve and the lower curve, because it's the best way to do it and get it nice and accurate. I'm then going to link up that stitching and connect it up on the machine to do the sides, because I can tuck under the machine easily. So this section here and this section here. So just use that same stab back stitch as we did on that foot pad and get that one all stitched into place, and then just repeat with the other piece on the other side. Here I have that completed little body all turned through. Before you turn it through, do make sure that you make your holes ready for your joint spots. And we've got, of course, that little space for the opening there to pop that bolt through for the head. Really roll out all of your seams, and you can see that's just a gorgeous little body. We're going to put that aside. Now we get to make the fun part, which is, I guess it's all fun parts, isn't it? But I love making heads. So we've got our two side head pieces. We're going to put those right sides together, and we're going to line up that front center seam as we always do with most bears. Make sure that's very well lined up. We're going to pin and overcast just that front chin seam there. Now, overcasting is something that a lot of people leave out, and they don't do it. They go straight to the machine with this one. If you want really beautiful finish, always overcast your pattern pieces first. It keeps everything in place, stops it from slipping, because you'd be surprised how much the machine actually moves the fabric. So that's just a little bit of advice from me. It doesn't matter how long I've been making soft sculpture, I always overcast everything. So we're going to get that 4mm seam done, sewing 2 times like everywhere else. Once you have that chin seam stitched, open up your overcasting stitch so that you can open out and flatten that front chin seam. Your whole front chin will sit better and be straighter if you do that. So now I've pushed that out, rolled out that seam, pop that back, and now we're ready to add our centre gusset, which is about the most important part of your bear. So I've taken my pin and I've put my pin through at my seam allowance right at that centre mark, much like we do with a foot pad, and take it straight through that centre seam and push that pin head all the way down, making sure it's really well lined up. And then we're just going to start to pin that, just the front nose section, into place. We're going to do that in that same 3D style, going from side to side again. And I always sew in that first nose section first. So you've got a mark here on your head gusset template and a mark on your side head. You can see how well they line up, and make sure they're matched to each side. That way you know that that muzzle is perfectly balanced on both sides. You're going to have a nice straight muzzle. There won't be any twists in it, which again can really affect the whole look of your bear. So I have that one pinned into place, and I always just overcast that one into place and then sew that section in with my stab back stitch. So the same stitch that we used to put in those foot pads. And then we're going to come back and do the rest of those side seams. If you have a look there, you can see that stab back stitch that front nose section into place just to each of those marks. Always pop that through before you continue on to make sure that you've captured everything and you've got a lovely straight even muzzle there. Once you have, let's pop that back, and we can go ahead, and now we're going to line up the 2 side head pieces all the way down to the back of the neck, pinning it in the same way. Just follow that along, meeting up those 2 edges. And again, if you've kept to your seam allowance of 4mm, you'll find that that will match up beautifully. And when you're sewing this one, again, also make sure you overcast this first, because it's a very, very round little head on this bear, and made in felt, of course. We're going to see every little missed stitch or interruption in that nice fluid curve. So keep that stitching nice and consistent. We are going to sew this section on the machine because you can get it under the machine easily. So there you go, that's got that little side head pinned in. Now it's important to remember that all of the work that you're doing in sewing this section and the two side head pieces, we'll be pinning that one into place once we've stitched this one. Do all of your work on that centre head gusset. Don't try and sew it in from this side. You'll get all sorts of problems and twists and turns. This way is going to keep everything nice and straight, and it's much easier to do this way. So I'm going to go ahead, overcast that one into place, remove my pins, and then I can just connect up my machine stitching with that front hand stitching there all the way down to the back of the neck. Make sure you back and forth at the back of the neck there and also on your join. And remember, on the machine we sew that one 2 times. I've gone ahead and turned that head through and rolled all those seams out and checked that everything is nice and smooth and rounded, and particularly rolled out this front area here. So now we're ready to fill this head. So I'm going to be using my forceps and also fingers. So I often fully stuff a head with my fingers, and then I can add pieces into little soft pockets with my forceps. But initially I think I get better balance by stuffing with my fingers. So of course I'm going to start with that muzzle section. Now, because this is a very small muzzle that opens out into a large cavity, it's tricky to keep all of that stuffing in this end. So that's where your wool felting needle is going to come in really handy. And also, if you really pack that front muzzle, and you see how I'm supporting everything as I'm doing it, remember too, as I always say, you're not just filling a hole or a space, you're sculpting a shape. So always be turning it over and checking and seeing how that shape's coming up. So I like to pack that muzzle section as firm as I possibly can, because of course that's going to make nose stitching easier. And then I start to fill out this section here and continue on till I've got it all in. If this nose section still feels a little soft, and the chin section, that's where you get your forceps and you can take your filling and you can really tuck it in there till it's absolutely solid. So we're going to fill to just a little way from the edge there to leave room for us to pop in our neck bolt. And I will be using my wool felting needle the whole time. I'm going to get that all filled up and I'll show you how that looks. So this is our little panda head all filled out, and you can see nice and broad and round and very, very firm. You can see no give in there at all. So now I've gone ahead and taken a doubled strand of extra strong thread and sewn a running stitch just in from the edge, only about 4 to 5 millimeters in from the neck edge. Left my tail ends hanging so that we can tie it off. And now we're going to add our neck bolt. I have used my wool felting needle to really flatten that stuffing, so it's packed absolutely solid. So we can just slip in that disc there, and we're going to take our thread ends. I've already tied a preliminary knot, and it really is just about pulling that in, pushing on that joint and pulling those thread ends in to bring those layers around as tight as you can around that bolt, and then knotting that off at least 3 or 4 times. This is where you might need somebody's help to put a thumb on that knot for you while you do that. So you can see that neck bolt nice and secure, and do make sure that you center that joint right in the middle. So now our next step is we're going to go ahead and add that nose template. Of course, all of my lovely masterclass followers, if you were sculpting a nose, of course, you know the procedure. You would have added your clay behind and gone ahead, you know that drill. But now we're going to be adding a stitch nose, which I think is really sweet with this project. So I've got my piece of leather cut out to that template shape. You've got that template there. I'm using my clear craft glue, and I'm just going to liberally coat the back right to the edges of that template. If you don't have a piece of leather, go ahead and use a piece of doubled felt or even a piece of stiffened felt if you have it, because it needs to be quite firm. If it's nice and firm, it'll hold the outside edge of your stitches better. So that one is nicely glued up. And my position for adding this template is, of course, that we're going to line it up with the centre seam. And I'm just having it just extending over the top of that seam in the middle there. Just making sure I've got it all nice and even there. All nice and straight. Put the palm of my hand over it initially. The warmth is going to help start that glue drying. The clear craft glue is very quick to dry. Never attempt to stitch this nose unless your glue is completely dry. So I will be holding that for a few minutes till I'm sure that's very well bonded, and then I'm just going to let it sit there to dry absolutely completely, and then we're going to come back to put in our mouth and our stitching over that nose. So here we are back with that nose all nicely dried now. We can go ahead and do our embroidery stitching over it. So what I have here is my large doll needle. You can use your medium doll needle if you feel better with that. I've got a doubled strand of my 8-ply pearl thread, and I've put the two open ends through the eye of the needle. I haven't just taken one end through. The reason for that is, while you're doing your stitching, if you happen to do a wonky stitch, you can still get out of your needle and remove the last thread. It means you don't lose all of the work you've already done. So that's just a tip there for you. We're going to just put a knot in the end of our doubled strand, and we're going to start off somewhere at the back, and we're going to aim to bring our needle out. And I'm bringing mine out just about 1/2 centimetre, 5 millimetres down from that point, because we're creating the little lip line now, but you don't want it too long. It can look quite odd. If you want a very sweet little face, you keep that lip line quite short. And I'm going to bring my needle out right through that centre seam. So you can see there just exactly where that needle's coming out, and we're going to pull that all the way through. Now, that knot we need to sink into the head. So I've just pulled that out a little. I'm just going to increase the size of that hole so that I can just drop that knot in, which should hold at the back there. So now I'm going to take both those threads, and our first stitch is going to go straight up the centre of that nose template. And I've laid those stitches out, making sure that they're straight and they're not crossed over or twisted. I'm going to hold my thumb there. I'm going to take my needle in right at the top of that template, and this time I'm going to exit just to one side of the seam at the start of that template there. So hopefully you can see there, just at the side and right on the edge of that template. So I pull my stitches up, make sure they're not crossed, and pull that through. I've changed over to my medium-sized needle. Pull that one in and make sure that those stitches are being placed exactly where you want them, and that they're going in nice and straight. This is something you need to do in the most comfortable position. Stitching a perfect nose takes great patience and practice. I'm going to take both of those thread ends and pull on them so that that stitch is evenly pulled down. Check that it's placed where you want it. And then we're going to bring those threads up, and we're laying this stitch right next to that one. This time we're going to go in at the top just as we did before, and we're going to come out on the other side, just to the side of this center stitch, just as we did with this one. So there we go. See that needle coming out there again? Pull those thread ends through. And I'm still holding that stitch in place. Checking that it's not twisting as it's going into that fabric there. Again, pulling on those both independently, so you've got a nice clean finish at the top there. Now we're going to pull up the next stitch, again keeping those threads not twisted. We're going to go back in at the top there and come out just a little bit further along. So you can see we're going to go in and out, side to side, until the entire template is covered. A lot of people sew one side first and then do the other side, but I find the best way to get a balanced nose is to go from side to side. So I'm going to cover that whole template following that procedure, and when I get to my final stitch, we're going to create that mouth. So here we are, I have that whole template covered, and now I'm about to place my final stitch in this side. So I'm going to take my needle in at the top there as what I would have before, and this time I'm going to bring my needle out to the corner of what will be the smile. So a way to check that you're getting it in the right position is that you can bring a needle out. I don't want a huge mouth on this little bear because he's got such a little muzzle. You can actually take your needle, grab your thread, and you'll be able to test it. And you'll be able to have a look at that angle and see whether that's what you're after or whether you want it a little bit smaller. But I think that's around about right. So I will take my needle through. I'll make sure that that final stitch is very well placed. As I pull that through, again, I'm going to pull on both of those threads. While holding that stitch, I don't want it to slip off the edge of the template. Check that you've got everything nice and even, if that's all good. So now we're going to take our needle and we're going to slip it underneath those first threads. We're not going to catch any of the fabric, just pulling it up and under. Again, I'm making sure that my threads aren't twisted as I pull that one through. I'm going to really pull on that to give it a bit of pull in. And then all I need to do is match that up on the other side. But do give it a good bit of tension. So there's a little bit of pull in at the front there. I'll enter my needle in the right spot and I'll come out of the back of the head here, travel down again to the base here and just make a couple of knots, and that will have that nose and mouth secured. So you can see there that lovely nose and smile in place. I will be adding a clear artist gloss medium over that nose, but I'm going to do that when he is completed. So for now, our next step is to add those eyes and eye patches. So I'm using an 8mm eye. You could go down as small as a 6mm, it will still work well. So I'm using my eye tester pins and I've chosen my position. The position for this little bear's eyes is right on the curve, right on the bend, and very, very close to that seam line. Make sure that you check it from every angle that you're getting that right. And then with your awl, make a decent hole traveling through, and also enlarge it with a knitting needle or something like that, just gently, because we need to be able to feel those pockets through a felt patch that we're going to add here. So you need to try and position your felt patch. Now have a look at how I'm putting them on. They're going downwards, they're curving downwards, they're not going upwards, they're going down. So a little sad sort of look there. And try your eye tester pin again through that spot, just to make sure you're getting this in the right position, because we're going to felt this into place and then add our eyes. So once you're happy with that spot, and do check both sides and see how it will look. You can see that lovely panda look coming in there. Make sure that you're going to be getting them both even. And I will probably just bring that down just a little bit. There we go. So once you've got that one in place, you're going to be able to match that one up easily. But I'm pretty happy with that. That's sitting there. So initially I can actually even leave that pin in, and we're going to needle felt it into place. Now you may be just using your alcohol markers to create a little eye patch, or you might be using an airbrush, whatever you like, but this way is super simple. I'm using my 39 to 40 felting needle here, and I'm just going to punch that felt eye patch into place. Of course, when we add the eye over the top of that, that's going to secure that eye patch too. But for now, just tapping that in there, getting it into its initial spot. And I often like, once I've got it just nicely in place, I like to add the second one just to make sure that I'm getting them in the right position. So just a few gentle taps for now. Now I'm just going to do the same with this one. So I'm pretty happy with those being nice and even, and I can even pull out that eye now, and I can go ahead and really felt those into place. Now when you're doing your felting, you don't just stab from one direction. You've got to make sure that you're securing that felt piece this way and then this way, right the way around. Keep turning your work so you're getting every angle, and make sure you really secure those edges. And it really is the easiest way, if you're felting into felt, the easiest way to add some colour and shapes and design. And it's really a lovely permanent. And it's a very, it very makes it at one with the fabric, so it doesn't look like an add-on, it just becomes part of that fabric. So that's all I'm going to do is stab away there. Now where I've got that mark in the that eye position in the centre, I'm going to take my awl through it and find that pocket so that I've got it really going in the right spot. And you see there, my awl has found that same track. So I know that I can enlarge that hole and settle that in around there. So I'm going to keep tapping away until I've got both those eye patches nicely secured. So there I have those eye patches all felted beautifully in place, and you can see it gives such a lovely softness around that patch there. So our next step is to actually add the eyes. Now because I am putting black eyes onto black patches, I first cut a tiny circle of white felt just to surround one edge, the lower edge of the eye. So that in itself is a bit of a mission. So the best way to do that, especially when you're using eyes this small, the way that I do it is I make a hole in my piece of plain felt. I pop the eye, well imagine this is my eye, straight on there. Then I take my little scissors and I cut all the way around, leaving one edge slightly larger. That gives me just that perfect little eye with that surround. You don't want the white showing around the entire outside of the eye, because then it just gives you a startled look. So you want a little bashful look, and you can adjust it all once we're popping those eyes in. So they are both slipped on the back of the shank of that eye. If you don't want the expense of using glass teddy bear eyes, you can definitely buy black shank buttons, which you can add in the same way, or you can use a normal button and still put it on this way. So now we're going to take our doubled strand of extra strong thread I'm using in this case, and I am then going to fold it over again to find the middle. I've got that doubled over middle, so I've got 4 threads here, and now I'm going to thread that through the shank. It's all a little bit fiddly. Once that's on, open out that loop and take all of your thread ends through that loop, and now we have the eye secure on those 4 strands, and we're ready to add it to our doll needle, which we will do with this one already. I'm going to use my large doll needle and take all those thread ends through. And we've got our hole already there. We're going to take that needle straight through, right down to the back of the head, right down close to the base, right in the centre. I'm going to pull that one all the way through. And now is when you're going to be able to position that felt that you've got, because you want it to be sitting ideally outwards around the lower edge of the eye. And once we pull that in, there'll be nothing showing at the top of the eye. So this exit hole at the back here, I actually like to put a knot in those so it tells me which 4 threads are for which eye. So I've knotted that off. I'm going to just make that hole a little bit larger, because now I'm going to take the other eye, thread it up on my needle and do the same thing. We're going to go in here and we're going to come out of exactly the same hole. And there you go. So you can see what I mean about the no white showing at the top of the eye and that lovely little bit of white on the underneath. That lovely bashful little look. So both my thread ends are coming out the back through that same hole. I've tied my one preliminary knot. Now we get our thumbs and we're really going to press down on those eyes. As we do so, we're going to be pulling in at the back there. We want some nice depth to those eye sockets. So now's when I will go off camera and again get yourself in the right position, really squeeze those in. You'll be able to knot that off at least 4 times. Because you've tied it into the stuffing of the head, not on the surface of the fabric, when you snip those thread ends, they will be lost into the back of that stuffing. And there you can see those eyes beautifully sunk. Lovely little effect there. Now you can add a little bit of shading if you want to. I'm keeping this bear quite simple and pure. I may just put a tiny bit of shading just on that underlip section there, but on the whole I like that clean look with this one. So now we're going to go ahead and put him together. We're going to do those ears last, but you can imagine just how sweet he's going to look when he's all done. So let's go ahead and put this little guy together. So we've got our body. We're going to start with our legs. We've already made those holes. We've got our legs. Make sure that they are pointing in the right direction. Straight past that bolt, straight through there, through to the other side, and then we're going to add our corresponding disc and our washer. You might be using cotter pin joints. You can go ahead and add them as you normally would. And then I'm going to add that nut. At this stage I'm just going to finger tighten because I want to make sure that I've pulled out all of those fabrics from between that joint so that it's nice and clear, everything's sitting nice and flat. Tighten that up. So for jointing with felt, you'll find the felt grips to itself pretty well. You need to tighten that joint until it's just a bit firmer than you want it to be, because the felt will compress over time. So go ahead and tighten that up. I always like to tighten it until I can just move it, and then it's fine. So now I will go ahead, because I'm using the nut and bolt method, I will take a drop of super glue and drop it into the threads around that nut so that it will never come adrift. Then you can go ahead and add that second leg and then the arms in their positions also, and remember to add that drop of super glue. Then we have arms and legs all joined. You can see that lovely little baby shape happening. And now we're just going to add the head in the same way. So taking that bolt straight through. We're running out of room here now. Let's stand him on his head. Drop in that corresponding disc. That washer. And again with that nut. Finger tighten again. Just to make sure that joint's all right. And again with that neck joint, I like it to be quite posable, so I don't over tighten it around the neck, but you definitely want a nice secure joint. I'll do the same thing and add my little drop of super glue there. And so now all we need to do is fill this little bear up, and that's quite a simple job because it's not a big body and you can fill it soft if you like. It doesn't have to be filled tight. I fill everything packed firm. That's just how I do things unless I'm working with Sherpa. So I'm going to pack that base out first. However you fill it, make sure that you fill well around all of those joints to support them, and up into these shoulders to support that neck joint as well. Don't overfill directly under the arms, otherwise those little arms will sit right out. And use your wool felting needle to get that all packed in just a little away from the back edge, and we will come back and do that closing of that opening. And once you have your little bear all filled, you can go ahead and just use your felting needle to tuck all those fibres in. I've left myself just enough room to be able to pull that in nicely. I've got a single strand of extra strong thread ready with a whole pile of knots on the end there so that that knot will hold, and I'm starting off with my normal needle. I'm going to go in underneath, take my needle in right where that seam starts to open out, in at my 4mm seam allowance, take my needle through. So now I'm going to travel straight across and do the same on the other side. I'm going to take my needle, dive in, and I'm going to travel down just one stitch. This is why we need our curved needle in a minute. So I've just travelled down the length of one stitch just to pull that across. I hope you can see that. I do have a video that shows you how to sew a closing stitch, a ladder stitch. I'll put the link at the top there for you. So now I'm going to switch over to my curved needle, which makes this all a whole lot easier. So now I'm going to dive back in to the first hole where I started, and of course that needle being curved, it's much easier to create your little stitches as you travel down. So now I've gone back and forth, give that a squeeze, and you can see that's going to start to pull that in. I cross back over to the other side again, and each time I'm going into the exit hole that I last came out of. Give that a squeeze. You see that starting to come together. Because we zigzag those edges, it's nice and true. It's all matched up. You can see how the curved needle makes it a much easier job. Give it a squeeze and pull it in. All you need to do is continue back and forth, remembering to go into your exit hole each time, right down till you've closed that opening. So the last step in putting together a little panda is to sew on those ears. Now you may have noticed this time with these ears, I've done nothing to them. I haven't glued the edges together, the pieces together. I've kept them just sewn, turned, close that opening, because I like them to be quite full and puffed. So, and adding them to the head is really quite simple in this case. You're positioning to get that panda kind of a look. They need to be set quite high and very, very curved, but they're not a tall ear. So I've got this one pinned into place exactly. I'm going to show you exactly how I do this one. And that is that I have my first pin ready straight through that front seam. And I'm going to take that, it's about 1 centimetre from the head seam here. So first of all, going to take that, then I'm going to curl that one around my finger and bring it right back to the front again. So we've got an absolute curve. I'm going to get my finger in there and pin it from behind at the back, right in the centre, following that seam line. So make sure you've got everything lined up. Look at that over and over again. Look at it from every angle. And I need to pull that back just a fraction. And once you've got it into position, you can put a whole lot more pins in it. So that that curve is kept pushed out all the way around. And best way to pin is from behind. Pulls everything up and out. So when you're absolutely sure of your placement, and that's right on both sides, everything's lined up, we're going to stitch those ears on. Now, of course, you can change your bear's expression dramatically by where you put the ears. You can put them on the side of the head and make your bear look quite goofy or quite retro. You could line them up with the seam line and pull them around, but I just like this very storybook type of look. It's a very Rupert Bear sort of a look. So now we're going to sew them on. Now I have just uploaded a video that shows you how to sew on ears just in general. This is the same sort of technique. And we're just going to go in at the side of the head. I've got a long strand of extra strong thread. I'm sewing the ears, black ears, onto a cream head. So I'm actually going to use black thread. And I'm coming out right at the front there. Pulling that one all the way through. I am going to sink that knot by making that hole just a little bit larger and pulling that knot through so it won't be seen. So my first stitch is going to be to take up some of that, the front of that ear. I'm going to dive in. I'm going to travel across through the head and come out at the base of the ear here. Right where that starts. Pull that one all the way through, and that's going to pull down that front edge of the ear. Then I'm going to go back into the ear at the base here, dive in, I'm going to go back to where I started. So what that's going to do, you can see that that's pulling those top and the base of the ear in nice and tight. I'm going to go back and forward between those 2 points in the same way 3 or 4 times, just to anchor those front and base sections in. So I've done my 3 or 4 stitches back and forth here, and I'm at the base. I'm going to go in at the base. I'm just traveling a little way, and I'm going to come out on the base of the ear, just on the edge here, and I've just traveled a little way along because we know we've got that front anchored now. So now we just have to anchor the rest of the curve of the ear. So basically, I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to go back in, dive into that head and travel a little further along here. And you just make your way just in a crisscross fashion around the curve of that ear. And as you can see, all of your threads are hidden, but the ears are actually being sewn into the head rather than just on the surface of the fabric, which means they stay in the right position. Very, very strong way to sew ears on. You see I've dived in again, taking some of the ear, coming up from behind. Remove your pins as you go so you know where you're up to. Take some of that ear, diving into the head and travelling along. And once you've done the whole curve of the ear, you can just go back and forth and reinforce any areas that you think you might have missed. And they will be the most secure little ears with a perfect cut curve. So I'm going to finish that one and get that one matching into place. So that completes our beautiful little panda bear in the beautiful baby sort of shape and style. I absolutely love it. And now you can just imagine him or her in so many different colours. Another way to do it is to stay with the black points and change up your colours here. And you can go with anything. You go with lilac and pinks and baby blues, anything you like. It doesn't have to be natural colours. So I have gone ahead and finished off that nose by painting with some gloss gel medium. It's an artist product. Do buy an artist quality product if you're going to get this. You'll find it at most of your art supply stores. It's water wash up. You apply it with just a soft brush and it just keeps those nose stitches in place and also gives it a bit of a nice shine. And because it's an artist product, it's non-yellowing. So don't be tempted to use something else like PVA mix or something like that, because it will yellow over time. So I just think it's the most beautiful, simple bear. So this is the same pattern, only this is my large goat doll. This is her companion. So made up in just a plain coloured felt, tiny little eyes and a sculpted nose this time. So you can see the ways you can change it up. And of course on this one I've just thrown on a beautiful little plaited yarn scarf with another colour to bring out, to break up that two colour look. This little one I've dressed in little knitted things. Now I have a bit of an obsession. My obsession is hand knitted little cardigans and jumpers. I love little bears in hand knits. This one here you can see just made those same cute little ears, lovely rounded head. It's just a great base pattern. But I do have the perfect little cardigan for this one because I have to confess that I do collect little cardigans just for times like this. So I'm just going to get him dressed up. So there we go. You can't tell me that's not the perfect cardigan for that little guy. I'm so glad I had it in my stash. It just gives me an excuse to replace it too. I'll have to find a new one. I've got so many of them, but they really are great for little bears like this. It's just a little extra. One day I will have enough time to properly learn to knit. If you know a good knitter, enlist their help in making tiny things. So I hope you've enjoyed this pattern. I really have. I think it's got a lot of scope for so much creativity, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of yours. So thank you all for joining me today, joining me to learn how to make the beautiful panda. He's got his little jumper on now. I can't wait to see if any of you are as into little hand knits as I am on a tiny scale. So we'll see what you've got. Bring out your little cardigans. So I'm a bit like that with buttons too. I know a lot of you are. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please give me a thumbs up. That would be absolutely beaut. And remember, if you want to chat to me personally, if you really want to get my attention, you're best to contact me via Instagram, and you can see across the screen there, that is my Instagram account, and you can chat to me there. You can private message me. ask me anything you like. So things get very busy, and sometimes if you send me a comment and I miss it, doesn't mean I'm ignoring it. It just means that there's a lot to see. So make sure that you try and get my attention for sure. I don't want to miss out on anything. So everybody, have you joined our Facebook group yet? If you haven't, come and join. Fantastic bunch of people, we like to think. Very friendly, very creative, and you can share anything you've made with my patterns on that site, and it's very, very encouraging, and it gives you some fantastic ideas. And I have a whole lot of fabulous wingmen there who will jump in and help you, who are very, very knowledgeable. So thank you so much everybody for your support, overwhelming support for Annie, my new masterclass project. Of course, if you want to join masterclass, go right ahead and hit that link down below. I've also put the link for our Facebook page there too. So look, everybody, stay safe this week. I am looking forward to all of your little bi-coloured bears coming up and all of the different ways. Remember to tweak these patterns. I love it when you be original. So thank you so much, everybody. Stay safe and keep on paying all those good things forward. Till next time, it is hooroo from me.